Eric Shesky's Weekly You Demon. Culture, society, drinking, philosophy, religion. He's never out of his element. So sit back with a sarsaparilla and enjoy.
Episode 62. I mentioned last week that I would do a podcast segment that just goes through 20 or 30 dates that you should know in order to get a general historical perspective. Well, that idea was well received based on what I heard. So that's what I'm doing this week. But I'm not doing 20 or 30 dates. That's just going to be overwhelming and I don't think necessary yet. I'm going to do 10 dates, or actually 10 years. I don't really care about specific dates, just years and things happen that I think are significant for getting a fragile historical sense. I don't know, I was trying to come up with an analogy what this would be like. I think if you memorize these 10 years and understand why I selected them, you'll get like an arm around history, kind of like one of those great big balls you sit on to develop your core, but like 10 times bigger but lighter. You kind of get your arms around like maybe a fourth of it, you can kind of carry it. That's kind of how I envision what I'm doing here, giving you one of those great big exercise balls that you hold on to and you can kind of carry it and wobble with it a little bit. In the future, I'll try to flush it out and add more dates and kind of give you some handles to go on the ball and give you a firmer grip. But that's kind of what we're doing today. Okay, a couple of ground rules. First, I'm going from 1300 BC to 1492 AD. That's not all historical time. Yeah, I guess historical time starts around 3000 BC, but I'm not gonna go there. Let's face it, this is a Western-centric podcast, which makes it Judeo-Christian. I'm most interested in about 1300 BC, which is Moses. If you want to know more about that 1700 years between Moses and the dawn of historical time, well, I guess I'll summarize as this. It was Egypt and the pharaohs, and civilizations in and around Iraq, Mesopotamia, like Sumeria. If you want to know something, there you go. That's the first 1700 years of history. Second ground rule. I'm saying BC and AD. I'm not trying to be a contrarian dick, okay? It's just simply easier to say BC than BCE. And I understand BC is not technically accurate, but criminy. It's just pedantic to say BCE, in my opinion. The whole movement to go to BCE was just based on anti-Christian bigotry. And again, technically it's more accurate, I don't deny that. But it's an extra freaking syllable. Everyone knew BC wasn't quite BC because Christ was probably born in 4 BC or thereabouts, so therefore he wasn't born in the year 0. So, and again, like I said, BC is always kind of stuck in my craw. I think if BC stood for, if it was BM, like before Muhammad, we wouldn't have changed it. But, but being BC, we had to get changed to BCE. I don't even know who made the campaign to make it BC. I don't know who made that like their cause celebre. As I know it wasn't the Pope. Well, maybe this Pope would have, Third ground rule. This ain't multicultural. It's Western history. If someone else wants to come up with 10 years for developing an historical sense for the Chinese dynasties, Japanese shoguns, Samoan boat people, and the Aborigines in Australia, have at it, man. Go get your podcast going and do it. Fourth, these 10 years aren't subject to debate. I've picked them, they're subjective. You can't debate these 10 years I've picked any more than you can debate whether Bruce Jenner is a chick. It's all subjective. Fifth ground rule, and possibly the most important, these aren't the 10 most important years in pre-modern history. Because, by the way, that's what 1492 stands for, basically the beginning of modernity. Now, I'll get to that. These are not the 10 most important years in pre-modern history. Not at all. I picked these 10 years because they have tentacles. From these years spring other reference points, or each year marks a turning point of some sort. And no doubt about it, each year is selected because something significant happened during that year, but that's not the primary reason it got selected. There are many much bigger years for events that happen that get left off. That was intentional. One final note, this is in the ground rule, but I'm going to do 10 podcast episodes after this. Each episode is going to have a segment focusing on one of these 10 years. Through that process, I hope I put some flesh on each of these bones. First, I'm just going to read off the years. 1300 BC, 589 BC, 399 BC, 27 BC, 313 AD, 622, 1000, 1274, 1453, 1492. Now let's have at it. Okay, leading it off is 1300 BC. This is when Moses leads the Israelites out of Egypt. Okay. Historically speaking, we don't even know that Moses existed. And we sure as heck don't know the exact date. Last week, for instance, I referenced 1200. That was the old Will Durant date I had taken from Will Durant's excellent 11-volume History of the Western Civilization. It appears now the consensus is more closer to 1300, so that's what I'm going to use. Probably should use 1250. Doesn't really matter. But from this date, when Moses, 1300, Moses leads the Israelites out of Egypt to go to the Promised Land, Israel. So from this date, you have the establishment of Israel, which leads pretty much to the entire Old Testament, including Samson, David, Solomon, the prophets, all those crazy cats. So if you know 1300 BC, you have a fix on Egypt at its greatness, albeit on the verge of decline, and you have a solid reference point toward the beginning of the Old Testament. 586 BC, the fall of Judah to the Babylonians. This is what's known as the Babylonian captivity. It's also my personal term for my marriage. Just kidding, sweetheart. So 586, the Israel born of Moses was finished. In episode 61, I talked about the age of ecumenical empires and its importance, how it changed Western civilization's entire mental landscape. It brought Stoicism, Gnosticism, Christianity. But I personally start the date of the ecumenical empires to 586. The Babylonian Empire is pretty big. Not really an ecumenical empire like Persia. So that's technically the old Persian Empire, the one of the Zoroastrians. They're the ones that dethroned the Babylonians. That was really the first ecumenical empire. And they actually let the Jews return to Jerusalem in 539. But I think it's best to start at the age of ecumenical empires of 586, and that gives you a fix on the termination point of the independent state of Israel or Judah. And you have a fix on the rise of the Persian Empire. It arose shortly after 586. And that old Persian Empire, that was the one then that would shortly invade Greece and bring us the Battle of Marathon in 490 and that awesome movie 300. 399 BC, the death of Socrates. The greatest city-state killed its greatest man. That's huge. But not for this. Again, we're just trying to get an historical sense. What's important here is that 399 is one, easy to remember. That's partly why I picked it. But it also fixes us at the end of the golden age of Greece. Athens had reigned supreme in the 400s. It lost to Sparta in the Peloponnesian War, so it's on definitely a decline. Big time. And it brings us to the verge of the destruction of classical Greece in general. Socrates taught Plato. Plato taught Aristotle. Aristotle taught Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great would end the Greek city-states and bring in the greatest ecumenical empire of the age, prior to Rome. Next, 27 BC. Think toga. Well, think Augustus. A man named Octavius became Caesar. He became the first emperor of Rome. He didn't take that title. He called himself the first citizen, I think, but everyone knew he's the emperor. He is the man. With Octavius starts the Pax Romana. That's the Roman peace. Rome's civil wars were over. People from Julius Caesar and for the next, 30 years had vied for power through some pretty massive civil wars. Those are done. An era of peace came in with Octavian, or with the first Augustus Caesar, and it would last for over 200 years. the Mediterranean Sea was calm, cleared of pirates, trade and commerce could take off vibrantly. It's a big freaking deal. And if you know 27 BC, you have a fix on many things. The end of the Roman Republic, the start of the Roman Empire. Rome was nearing its zenith, which would reach under the Emperor Trajan. And the world was on the eve of Christianity. Okay, now we enter Common Era, CE, or Annus Domini, Year of Our Lord, 313 AD, the Edict of Milan. You're probably thinking, what, Shesky? You skipped the year of Christ's birth. You heathen pig. Well, yeah, as I've emphasized, this isn't a list of the 10 most important dates or years in history. Although the year of Christ's birth, which is undetermined by the way, would be useful because it puts us near 1 AD, I'm hard put to think how it gives us a fix on other surrounding historical events. I mean, the Pax Romana was in full swing. As I've pointed out previously, I think the Pax Romana was providential. It was intentional. It allowed the good news to spread. But that's about it. Pax Romana before Christ, Pax Romana after Christ. I'm not sure there's a whole heck of a lot to report that would give you an historical sense. Again, plenty of things are going on, but not so much to give an historical sense. So yes, I'm skipping over the birth of Christ. Going 300 years later to the Edict of Milan, where Emperor Constantine said, the persecution of the Christians stops now. This ain't gonna happen anymore. And it stopped and allowed Christianity to thrive. This year 313 then gives you a fix on the rise of Christianity as a social norm. So if you know 313, you know the end of paganism and the rise of Catholic institutions, whether it's the papacy as a civilizational force or monasteries or whatever it is. 313 is huge to get that historical sense of when Europe took a decisive turn. 622 AD. This is Muhammad's flight to Medina, where most scholars say Islam really started. The Hijra, I believe is how it's pronounced. Hegira. After this, Islam spread quickly. I mean, it freaking ran the table militarily. It routed everything before it. Huge swaths of the Middle East and Northern Africa were Muslim within years. I don't know, 10, 15 years. It was unbelievable, the force that came out of Arabia. People were just absolutely shocked, by the way. I remember one historian explained that, like, it was the people of the Middle East and Europe and Asia, Africa, they would have been as shocked as we would have been, say, in 1900 to have Eskimos just pour out of the North Pole and take over all of Canada and northern United States. It was just like, WTF, well, we didn't think anything was even in Arabia, much less these freaking tough warriors and this bizarre new creed of theirs. And it was just like it took the world by force. It was shocking. And it's a crucial date to remember, 622. If you have that, you have a fix on the rise of Islam, which is huge. And you have a fix on the start of the Dark Ages. And that's really the reason I picked it. I gotta take a detour, but it's a crucial detour. The Dark Ages didn't start in 476. As I've pointed out in my earliest podcast episodes, that's the official fall of the Roman Empire, and we know that did not happen. All that happened in 476 is that the administrative control passed from Italy to Constantinople. 100% of the Roman Empire was controlled directly from Constantinople. That's all that happened in 476. No Western emperor at all. Who at that point was pretty much subordinate to Constantinople already anyway, but no matter. The Roman Empire continued for hundreds of more years, not just in Constantinople, but also in Western Europe. As I pointed out, if you talk to a citizen, say, in 620 in France, you go to Lyon and talk to some French peasant there and said, "Yay, where do you live?" He said, "Oh, I'm part of the Roman Empire." That's how he would have responded. But with the rise of Islam and them taking over the grain supply out of northern Africa, which the Roman Empire relied on heavily, them crushing trade throughout the Mediterranean, it shut down commerce in Western Europe. That's when the Dark Ages really kicked in. I'm not saying things weren't kind of slipping before that, and this podcast can be long enough as it is, but suffice it to say, when the administrative center was eliminated out of Italy and went to Constantinople entirely. So did tax revenues. So did other important things. It'd be like what would happen in Northern Virginia today if Washington, D.C. was moved to Colorado. Northern Virginia is extremely wealthy, which should bother you, by the way. If you've ever watched Hunger Games and understand the geography of the Hunger Games, it should bother you that Northern Virginia is so freaking wealthy. All it's doing is living off revenue from the hinterlands. But anyway. If that were to happen, I mean, that whole area, that geographic region all around Washington, D.C. would take a big economic hit and things would kind of feel like a dark ages. So things were sliding after 476. But not like people thought for years. It was in the 600s when Islam disrupted trade, took over the grain supply out of northern Africa. That's when the dark ages kicked in full bore. So by understanding 622, you have a fix not only on the rise of Islam, you also have a fix on when the Dark Ages really began. By 650, Dark Ages were in full swing. The year 1000, Stephen crowned King of Hungary. That was pretty much the last domino to fall. All of Europe at that point, with the exception of a few areas in the far east of Europe, were now Christian. Two of the three great forces that had menaced Europe and made the Dark Ages especially dark, the Vikings and the Magyars, had now converted to Christianity or were part of Catholic Europe. The third force, by the way, that harassed Europe was the Muslims, and they didn't convert to Catholicism. But by knowing 1000, you have a fix on the end of the Dark Ages and the rise of what is properly considered the Middle Ages. They had relative peace at this time, and it gave rise to the prosperity that would culminate in the Age of Discovery, when European navigators started going around the globe, and the domination of Europe over the rest of the world, colonization. You can pretty much go back to 1000 and be like, when that last domino fell, pretty much all of Europe was Catholic, and relative peace. They kept warring among themselves, but not the same scale. These weren't pagans versus Catholics. These were all Catholics kind of fighting each other, and it gave rise to a general sense of peace and the flowering of the Middle Ages. I also like the year 1000 because it's easy to remember. It's not often you get like a historical reference point like that. Next up, the year 1274. This marks the death of everyone's favorite proto-postmodernist, Thomas Aquinas. As I've mentioned many times, words failed Thomas Aquinas at the end of his life. They couldn't capture what he saw in his mystical visions, so he fell silent. But that's not why I pick it. I picked this because Thomas Aquinas was the man. He built an edifice of reason that would inform Catholic civilization to this day, Catholic thought just in general. In order for a genius like Aquinas to arise, you needed the right circumstances, and the right circumstances were the peak of the Middle Ages. The mid-1200s, that was the Middle Ages' greatness. Its greatest flowering of thought. It was a truly astounding and marvelous century. I mean, just in sum, 1274 marks the high point of the Middle Ages. And then Aquinas died, and after him, Europe started a long decline that today is symbolized by the European Union. So by knowing 1274 and the death of Aquinas, you have a fix on what years constituted the true Middle Ages, 1000 to 1274. You have a fix on the coming of the late Middle Ages and all the problems associated with it. The Black Plague, the 100 Years' War, the Avignon exile, the papacy, and many other unfortunate things. All those things happened after 1274. So you think 1274, you think after this shit started getting bad. Number 9, 1453, the fall of Constantinople. Technically, that is the end of the Roman Empire. It's what Edward Gibbon means in this book when he says the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. He's talking 1453. By knowing 1453, you get a fix on the beginning of complete Islamic hegemony over the Middle East and the rise of Russia as the Third Rome. It also marks the end of 2,000 freaking years of Roman history. The Roman Republic started in 509 BC. Before that, there was a Roman kingdom, and even though details are shrouded in legend, it existed for at least 100 years prior to 509 BC. So 2,000 years Rome had existed, and again, if you just sit back and ponder that for 8 seconds, you realize just what an astounding thing that is. But it was over at 1453. Alright, number 10, 1492, Columbus. I think I can just leave it here. If you're not sure why 1492 gives you a fix on Western civilization, I'm afraid I can't help you much. But to keep it brief, 1492 gives you a fix on the coming of the New World. It's on the eve of the Reformation and the meteoric rise of Europe as the greatest force on Earth. It also marks even the most expansive definition of, quote, the Middle Ages, unquote. Historians debate, like, when did the Middle Ages really begin, when did it really end? But even the most expansive definition would say, hey, by 1492, Middle Ages were done. And it also marks the dawn of the modern age, or at least gets you to the eve of the dawn of the modern age. So, those are the 10 years to memorize. There are show notes at the website at udemapodcast.com if you want to read over some of the stuff to refresh your memory. And in future episodes, we're going to put some flesh on each of those bones. Alright, let's do some lightning segments. Coronavirus. What the freak is going on? I'm not sure anyone knows. I saw a bizarre story a few days ago about the giant Chinese internet company Tencent. I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, but they post infection figures 10 freaking times higher than official counts that the Chinese government were releasing. No one knows it was a fat finger typo type thing, or whether someone is trying to send a message that this is really, really freaking bad. And it apparently happened 3 times. You may want to ask yourself, so why does the Chinese government even keep figures on this at all? I mean, they're obviously trying to cover up how bad it is. I'm not sure it's as bad as Tencent implied with those 3 releases of those greatly elevated numbers. But why keep statistics at all? I mean, they gotta know there's a good chance someone's gonna leak them to the outside world, and people will see the truth about your country. Yeah, I know, you're probably thinking, well, it could just be a matter of responsible governing. But think about, what does that really mean? The government requires statistics to govern? And yet we know statistics are fraught with problems from start to finish. Methodology, the assembly, the interpretation. It's all whacked. Statistics are highly questionable. Yet the government apparently has to rely on them. And so I guess I'd suggest this is Shesky's rule for when government gets too big. You know, in the past I've said, citing Bill Kaufman, that government's too big if someone's making rules for you that doesn't know you. Doesn't know you personally. I'd say here's another good test. Government is too big when it needs statistics to govern. If your government needs statistics to govern, it's too large, it's too centralized. Time to break it apart. You go to smaller units of government. Statistics, Murray Rothbard once said, are the eyes and ears of the state. So I have little doubt the Chinese government assembles statistics more eagerly than Harvey Weinstein assembling chicks during casting tryouts. Speaking of which, did you see those naked court drawings of Harvey Weinstein? I did. I'm still blind. So I'm having dinner with Marie at a local restaurant last week. A girl, I don't know, 10, 11, 12 years old, came in and started going up the tables asking people to buy candy bars for her charity fundraiser. It took management about 5 minutes to tell her to leave. And I saw her get into someone's car, I'm guessing it was her mom's car, and drive away. Now, I was just dumbfounded at the audacity. Walking into a restaurant, bothering people during their drinks and the meals, asking them to buy these candy bars. And I told Maria, I said, yeah, I actually used to. I said, normally like those fundraisers. It only costs $1 or $2. And the kids are putting forth a little bit of effort for charity. And Maria's just like, you do know, right, that those boxes come from Sam's Club? You can just go to Sam's Club, get one of those boxes that are marked charity, rip off the lid, charge double or quadruple, whatever it is, $1 or $2, and I think they probably cost 50 cents per candy bar in these charity boxes, and right away you look like you're selling for charity. So the come out of these urchins, these modern day urchins, they're using them as phony props to trick people into giving them money. Now, you are getting candy bars back, so that's cool. But yeah, these candy bar fundraisers, you can just assume that these kids are getting money for themselves, or worse yet, money for their parents to prop up their booze and drug habits. I'm randomly reading from this book of John Simon reviews. It's just freaking great. It's filled with all sorts of funny anecdotes, funny lines, scenes from the movies. Bringing back memories, quite frankly. One of my favorite lines that John Simon talks about is from a Woody Allen movie. The male character is complaining that his marriage isn't going well, and his wife has, quote-unquote, cut him off. The character said, "I haven't been a woman since I went to the Statue of Liberty last summer." I tell you what, though, man, that John Simon was brilliant and biting. I just learned a couple of days ago that he died in November 2019, age 94. He was a theater reviewer for New York Magazine for a long freaking time, something like 30 years. He was finally fired for his politically incorrect commentary and, let's face it, kind of unkind comments that offended the actors on pretty much every freaking level. Politically, artistically, emotionally. John Simon was the kind of guy who wouldn't shrink from reviewing actresses' looks. I remember years ago reading him, and he compared an actress's breast to rotten vegetables. When she wailed her objection, John Simon said, "Hey, if you don't want me to review them, don't bear them." The guy also had a mastery of the English language. I mean, he had an absolutely freaking massive vocabulary. While I was listening to his obituary, the New Criterion actually read his obituary as a podcast episode. It's kind of a unique idea. But I learned in the obituary that English was his second language. And actually is his fifth language. The fifth language he learned. I was just shocked. It's unbelievable. I mean, I'm guessing like if you're a linguist, you could probably, read his prose and discern, okay, this guy is not a native born English speaker. But man, I've been reading him off and on for over 30 years, and I hadn't a clue that this guy I figured he was like Oxford educated, born, went to Eton. But no, fifth language. Another thing from that obituary that fascinated me, one of John Simon's final venues was his own blog, and it was financially underwritten by Yoko Ono. Now, for those who aren't aware, Yoko Ono was John Lennon's second wife. In the early 70s, they were like the poster children of the revolutionary left. And John Simon? Not so much. I mean, I don't know much about his actual politics, but culturally, he was fiercely conservative, and I gotta believe politically he was too, but I don't know about his politics. I know his conservative sensibilities is one reason New York Magazine fired him. And I think it's one reason he was the movie reviewer for William F. Buckley's National Review for many, many years. That's where I used to read him. To learn that Yoko Ono financially underwrote John Simon's blog, on the surface that'd be like, George Clooney's widow underwriting Gavin McInnes. But it brought back to mind an article I read probably 10 years ago as an essay. And this guy was saying, hey, John Lennon died when he was 40, and the article saying there's lots of evidence that he had gotten pretty conservative. He was actually turning pretty hard to the right. Not like David Bowie from being left to being like Nazi right. Nothing that remotely like that. Just like he was just, reaching middle age and getting more and more conservative in his sensibilities. And that's why they killed him! Just kidding. He was killed by a nut job. But let's face it though, it's a common trek. Youthful leftism to conservative middle age, that's common. It's very rare you see someone go right to left as they mature. It's always they go from left to right as they mature. And I also point out that John Lennon was always something of a contrarian. I always thought that's one reason he married Yoko Ono. I'm not saying Yoko was ugly, but she wasn't real pretty. And I remember seeing a picture of her when I was 8, 10 years old, I don't know, and I was thinking, yuck. Why is John Lennon married to her? And the implicit assumption in my young brain was, John freaking Lennon could have any girl he wants. Why this one whose looks are average at best. I guess that even at age 10, boys are aware that Harvey Weinsteinism is a spectrum disorder. Anyway, I don't think Yoko Ono was conservative by any stretch of the imagination, but she could have been a contrarian like her husband. And the fact that she finally underwrote John Simon's blog at the end of his life, I'll put that factoid into my one thing file. Okay, that's it for this week. If you get a chance, go check out YouDemonPodcast.com. Got a lot of extensive show notes over there. Based on traffic patterns, it looks like the show notes have been well received. As always, thanks for listening.